The morning mist hung thick over the Mekong Delta as Sergeant Mike Thompson adjusted his rifle scope for the third time in 10 minutes. Something wasn't right about this place. The swampland stretched endlessly in every direction, a maze of murky water channels, twisted mangrove roots, and floating vegetation that seemed to shift and move with a life of its own. Thompson had been leading reconnaissance missions in Vietnam for 8 months, but this particular stretch of wetland made his skin crawl. Intelligence reports suggested enemy movement in the area, but so far, his squad of 12 Marines had found nothing but mosquitoes, leeches, and the occasional startled water bird. "Sarge, we've been out here for 6 hours," whispered Private Rodriguez, swatting at the insects buzzing around his face. Maybe Intel got it wrong this time. Thompson held up his hand for silence. His instincts, honed by countless patrols through hostile territory, were screaming that they were being watched. The jungle had gone too quiet. Even the constant chatter of insects had died down to an unnatural stillness. Corporal Jenkins, positioned 20 yards to Thompson's left, was scanning the waterline through his binoculars when he froze. A small ripple disturbed the otherwise still surface of a water channel about 200 meters ahead. It could have been a fish or maybe a small alligator, but something about the movement pattern struck him as wrong. The squad had been moving through the swamp since dawn, following what appeared to be an abandoned supply route. Broken wooden planks and rusted metal debris suggested this area had once been used for transporting goods, possibly by North Vietnamese forces moving supplies south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail's water-based extensions. Thompson's radio crackled softly with static. Command had been trying to reach them for the past hour, but the dense canopy and electrical storms building on the horizon were interfering with communications. They were effectively on their own until they reached the extraction point 12 kilometers south. Private Williams, the youngest member of the squad at just 19 years old, was struggling with the weight of his pack in the humid conditions. Sweat poured down his face as he carefully picked his way through the knee-deep water, trying not to splash or disturb the surface more than necessary. The water was warm and murky, hiding who knows what beneath its dark surface. As they approached a small island of solid ground covered in thick vegetation, Thompson noticed something that made him signal for the squad to halt. Fresh footprints in the mud, barely visible but definitely human. The prints were small, suggesting either a woman or a young person, and they led directly into the dense undergrowth of the island. The Marines spread out in a defensive formation, each man covering a different angle of approach. Thompson studied the terrain through his scope, looking for any sign of movement or disturbance in the vegetation. The island was roughly 50 meters across, covered in thick bushes and small trees that provided perfect concealment for someone who didn't want to be found. A twig snapped somewhere in the vegetation ahead. Thompson's finger moved to his trigger, and he saw his men tense up in his peripheral vision. The sound could have been made by an animal, but in this war, assuming the best was often a fatal mistake. Minutes passed in tense silence. Thompson was about to signal his men to advance when he heard it, the barely audible sound of someone trying to control their breathing. Someone was definitely hiding in those bushes, probably watching them right now through iron sights. The morning sun had climbed higher, beginning to burn off some of the mist that had provided them with cover during their approach. Soon they would be completely exposed in the open water surrounding the island. Thompson knew they had to make a decision quickly. He was considering their options when Private Martinez, who had been covering their rear, suddenly dropped flat into the water. A split second later, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed across the swamp. The bullet had passed so close to Martinez's head that it had torn through his helmet cover. "Sniper!" Thompson shouted, and immediately all 12 Marines dropped into whatever cover they could find. The shooter had fired from somewhere behind them, not from the island as Thompson had expected. They were caught in open water with minimal cover, exactly the kind of tactical nightmare every infantry soldier feared. Another shot rang out, this time from a completely different direction. The bullet struck the water just inches from Corporal Davis, sending up a small splash. Thompson realized with growing alarm that they weren't dealing with just one sniper. There were at least 2 shooters, and they had his squad caught in a carefully planned crossfire. The Marines began returning fire, shooting at muzzle flashes and suspected hiding spots, but the enemy had chosen their positions well. Every time one of Thompson's men tried to move to better cover, another shot would force them back down into the murky water. Private Johnson, who carried the squad's radio, was desperately trying to establish contact with their base. "Thunder 6, this is Whiskey 4. We are taking accurate sniper fire and need immediate support, over." Only static answered his calls. They were on their own. Thompson's mind raced through their tactical options. They could try to suppress the enemy positions with concentrated fire and then advance. But that would use up their ammunition quickly. They could attempt to withdraw. But retreating across open water under sniper fire would likely result in casualties. Or they could try to locate and eliminate the shooters. But that meant splitting his already small force. As he weighed these choices, another shot cracked overhead. This one close enough that he could hear the bullet's supersonic snap as it passed. Whoever was shooting at them was skilled, patient, and very well concealed. Thompson realized they had walked into a trap, and now they had to fight their way out of it. The battle for survival in the Mekong Delta swamplands was just beginning, and Thompson knew that not all of his Marines might make it home. The water around Private Martinez began turning red as he pressed his hand against his shoulder. The second sniper's bullet had found its mark, tearing through his upper arm just below his Kevlar vest. He gritted his teeth to keep from crying out, knowing that any sound could give away his position to the shooters. Thompson low-crawled through the shallow water toward Martinez, keeping his rifle ready. The silence between shots was almost worse than the gunfire itself. He could feel invisible crosshairs tracking his movement as he made his way to his wounded Marine. "How bad is it?" Thompson whispered when he reached Martinez's position behind a fallen log that provided minimal cover. "I can still shoot, Sarge," Martinez replied through clenched teeth, but Thompson could see the pain in the young man's eyes. The bullet had passed clean through his arm, missing bone but causing significant bleeding. A third shot suddenly rang out from yet another direction, confirming Thompson's worst fears. They weren't dealing with just two snipers. There were at least 3 enemy shooters positioned around them in a carefully planned ambush. The bullet struck a tree branch just above Corporal Jenkins, sending bark and splinters raining down into the water. Thompson realized they had stumbled into something much larger than a routine patrol could handle. This level of coordination suggested they were facing a specially trained enemy unit, possibly North Vietnamese Army regulars rather than local militia forces. Private Williams, still the youngest and most inexperienced member of the squad, was starting to panic. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and Thompson could see his hands shaking as he tried to aim his rifle at shadows in the vegetation. Combat stress was something that affected even the bravest soldiers, and Williams was experiencing it for the first time. "Williams, listen to me," Thompson called softly but firmly. "Control your breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're going to be fine, but I need you focused." The psychological pressure of being hunted by invisible enemies was taking its toll on the entire squad. Every rustling leaf could hide a sniper's barrel. Every shadow could conceal death. The Marines had been trained for direct combat. But this cat-and-mouse game in the swamp was something entirely different. Corporal Davis, one of Thompson's most experienced men, had been studying the pattern of shots. "Sarge, I think they're trying to drive us toward that channel on our right. Every time someone moves left, they get shot at. When we move right, nothing." Thompson considered this information carefully. If Davis was correct, then the snipers weren't just trying to kill them. They were herding them toward a specific location. That could mean reinforcements, mines, or some other unpleasant surprise waiting in that direction. Private Rodriguez had been quietly working his way around the squad's perimeter, trying to get a better angle on one of the shooter positions. His movement caught the attention of the northernmost sniper, who sent a bullet splashing into the water just behind Rodriguez's position. "I saw the muzzle flash," Rodriguez reported over their tactical radio. "About 300 meters north, elevated position in those thick mangroves. Definitely using the root system for cover." This was the first solid intelligence they had on their attackers' positions. Thompson began formulating a plan that would require splitting his squad. Always a dangerous decision when facing superior numbers and positioning. The sun was climbing higher, and the morning mist that had provided some concealment was rapidly disappearing. Soon they would be completely exposed in the open water, making them easy targets for the elevated sniper positions. Time was working against them. Private Johnson finally managed to establish brief radio contact with their base. Through heavy static, he heard command acknowledging their situation, but weather conditions were preventing immediate helicopter support. The earliest they could expect extraction or reinforcements was late afternoon. Assuming the storm front building on the horizon didn't interfere, Thompson knew they couldn't survive that long in their current position. They had to take action even if it meant taking casualties. He called his squad leaders together for a quick tactical meeting, keeping their voices low and their movements minimal. "Here's what we're going to do," Thompson explained. "Davis, you take Williams and Johnson and provide covering fire from this position. Rodriguez and Martinez, even with that wounded arm, you're coming with me and Jenkins. We're going to try to flank that northern position Rodriguez spotted." The plan was risky, but staying put was certain death. Thompson's half of the squad would have to cross nearly 200 meters of open water and swampland to reach a position where they could engage the sniper. Meanwhile, Davis's group would try to keep the other shooters busy. As they prepared to move, another shot cracked overhead, this one so close that Thompson felt the bullet's wake disturb the air next to his ear. The shooters were getting bolder, or perhaps more desperate to finish what they had started. Martinez, despite his wounded arm, checked his ammunition and prepared to move. The bleeding had slowed somewhat, but Thompson could see the pain in every movement the young Marine made. Still, Martinez never complained or asked to be left behind. "On my signal," Thompson whispered into his radio, "Davis, give us 30 seconds of concentrated fire. Then cease fire and wait for my command." The jungle around them seemed to hold its breath, as if the very swamp was waiting to see who would survive this deadly game of hide-and-seek. Thompson counted down from 3, then gave the signal that would either save his squad or get them all killed. Davis's covering fire erupted like thunder across the swamp. 3 M16 rifles firing on full automatic sent dozens of rounds into the suspected sniper positions, forcing the enemy shooters to duck for cover. The concentrated gunfire lasted exactly 30 seconds, giving Thompson's flanking team precious time to move. Thompson, Rodriguez, Martinez, and Jenkins splashed through the shallow water as quickly and quietly as possible. The wounded Martinez kept pace despite his injury, driven by pure determination and military discipline. Every step took them farther from their original position, and deeper into enemy territory. The flanking movement required them to navigate through a series of interconnected waterways separated by small islands of thick vegetation. Each island could hide an enemy soldier, and each water crossing left them exposed to sniper fire. Thompson felt like he was walking through a minefield where every step could be his last. As they reached the first island, Jenkins suddenly held up his fist, the signal to freeze. He had spotted something in the mud that made his blood run cold. Fresh boot prints different from the ones they had seen earlier, and these prints were heading directly toward their original position. "Sarge," Jenkins whispered, "there are more of them. These tracks are maybe 20 minutes old, and they're moving to surround our guys back there." Thompson's mind raced through the tactical implications. If enemy reinforcements were moving to surround Davis's position, his entire squad could be wiped out within minutes. They needed to eliminate that northern sniper quickly and get back to help their teammates. Rodriguez, who had been studying the terrain ahead, pointed toward a cluster of mangrove trees about 100 meters away. "Movement in those trees, Sarge. I think that's our sniper." Through his binoculars, Thompson could make out what appeared to be a carefully constructed hide among the mangrove roots. The position was elevated about 10 feet above the water level, providing an excellent view of the area where his squad had been pinned down. Whoever had built that position knew exactly what they were doing. The approach to the sniper's nest would require crossing 50 meters of open water with no cover except for some floating debris. It was a calculated risk that could easily get them all killed, but Thompson couldn't see any alternative. Martinez checked his rifle one more time, testing his ability to aim despite his wounded arm. The bleeding had stopped, but Thompson could see the pain in Martinez's face every time he moved. Still, the young Marine insisted he was ready to fight. "Rodriguez, you take the left approach through those reeds," Thompson ordered. "Jenkins, you go right and try to get behind that position. Martinez and I will provide covering fire and then move straight up the middle." Just as they prepared to execute the assault, the distinctive crack of a sniper rifle echoed from their rear. Someone back at Davis's position had been hit. Thompson's radio crackled with Davis's urgent voice. "Whiskey 4 Leader, Williams is down. We need medical assistance immediately." Thompson's heart sank. Private Williams, the youngest member of his squad, had been hit. Davis's voice was calm and professional, but Thompson could hear the underlying tension. They were running out of time and options. The assault on the sniper position began with Rodriguez disappearing into the thick reeds on the left flank. His movement was barely visible even to Thompson, who knew where to look. Years of jungle training had taught Rodriguez how to move like a ghost through hostile territory. Jenkins began his approach from the right, using every piece of available cover. A fallen log here, a cluster of roots there, anything that could stop a bullet or break up his silhouette. The water was deeper on his side, sometimes reaching his chest, but he pressed forward without hesitation. Thompson and Martinez waited for their teammates to reach their positions before beginning their own advance. The wounded Martinez moved with grim determination, his rifle ready despite the pain in his shoulder. Thompson had seen many brave Marines during his tour, but Martinez's courage under fire was exceptional. The sniper's position remained ominously quiet. No movement, no muzzle flashes, nothing to indicate whether the shooter was still there or had relocated. This silence was almost more unnerving than active gunfire, because it meant the enemy was waiting for the perfect shot. As Thompson and Martinez began their approach across the open water, Thompson caught a glimpse of something that made his blood freeze. A reflection of sunlight off glass, a rifle scope, from a position completely different from where they expected the sniper to be located. "Martinez down," Thompson shouted, diving sideways just as a bullet snapped through the space where his head had been a split second earlier. The sniper had been waiting for them to commit to the assault before revealing his true position. The rifle shot came from a concealed platform built into the mangrove canopy, at least 20 feet above water level. It was invisible from ground level, but provided a commanding view of the entire area. Thompson realized they had been attacking a decoy position, while the real sniper watched from above. Rodriguez and Jenkins were now in grave danger, approaching what they thought was the enemy position, while the real shooter had them in his crosshairs from an elevated angle. Thompson had to warn them before it was too late. "All units aboard approach," Thompson called over the radio. "Sniper is elevated, repeat elevated position in the canopy. Adjust fire upward." Another shot rang out, this time targeting Jenkins as he moved between cover positions. The bullet struck the water just inches from Jenkins's position, sending up a small splash. The sniper was taking his time, choosing each shot carefully, playing with them like a cat toys with trapped mice. Thompson knew they had walked into a master sniper's killing ground, and now they had to fight their way out against an enemy who knew the terrain better than they did. Rodriguez was the first to spot the elevated sniper's true position. Years of hunting in the Louisiana bayous before joining the Marines had taught him to look up when tracking dangerous prey. Through the thick canopy, he caught sight of what appeared to be a small platform constructed of branches and camouflage netting. 30 feet up, 2 o'clock from the decoy position, Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "I can see the barrel moving." Thompson processed this information quickly. An elevated sniper in thick canopy cover was nearly impossible to hit with standard infantry weapons, but they had to try. The alternative was being picked off one by one until none of them survived. Jenkins had found cover behind a large mangrove root and was trying to get an angle on the elevated position. The shot angle was difficult, almost straight up through thick vegetation, but Jenkins was one of the best marksmen in the company. Meanwhile, back at the original position, Davis was dealing with his own crisis. Private Williams had been shot through the leg and was bleeding heavily. Davis had applied a field dressing, but Williams needed medical attention that they couldn't provide in their current situation. "Sarge, Williams is going into shock," Davis reported over the radio. "His pulse is rapid and weak. We need to get him out of here soon." Thompson felt the weight of command pressing down on him. Half his squad was pinned down with a wounded man who might die without immediate medical care, while the other half was trying to eliminate a sniper who had them outmaneuvered and outgunned. The elevated sniper seemed to read Thompson's tactical dilemma. Another shot rang out, not aimed at Thompson's assault team but back toward Davis's position. The bullet struck the water near Johnson, the radio operator, who was trying to establish better communications with headquarters. "He's playing with us," Martinez observed grimly, adjusting his position to get a better view of the canopy. "He could have killed Johnson easily, but he's just keeping us pinned down." Thompson realized Martinez was right. A sniper of this skill level didn't miss unless he chose to miss. The enemy was deliberately prolonging the engagement, possibly waiting for reinforcements to arrive and finish off the surrounded Marines. Rodriguez began climbing one of the larger mangrove trees, hoping to get high enough to engage the sniper on more equal terms. The tree was slippery from the humid conditions, and every movement created small sounds that might give away his position. But it was their best chance. As Rodriguez climbed higher, he could see more of the surrounding area. What he discovered made his heart sink. In the distance, he spotted movement. At least 6 more enemy soldiers moving through the swamp toward their position. They would be surrounded within minutes. "Sarge, we've got company coming," Rodriguez reported. "Multiple contacts approaching from the east, maybe 200 meters out." Thompson knew they were running out of time. With Williams wounded and enemy reinforcements approaching, they had to break contact immediately or face annihilation. But they couldn't retreat while the sniper controlled the high ground and clear fields of fire. Jenkins decided to take matters into his own hands. Instead of trying to shoot straight up through the canopy, he began moving to a position where he could get a side angle on the elevated platform. It meant crossing more open water, but the angle would be much better. The sniper, apparently sensing Jenkins' movement, shifted his attention from harassing Davis's group to targeting the immediate threat. A bullet crashed through the branches just above Jenkins' head, showering him with leaves and bark. Martinez, despite his wounded arm, had been quietly working his way to a position where he could provide covering fire for Jenkins. The pain in his shoulder was excruciating, but his training and loyalty to his fellow Marines drove him forward. "Jenkins, when I open fire, move fast," Martinez called softly. "I'll keep his head down for as long as I can." Martinez opened up with rapid semi-automatic fire, sending bullet after bullet into the general area of the elevated platform. He couldn't see his target clearly, but the concentrated fire would force the sniper to take cover and spoil his aim. Jenkins used the covering fire to sprint across 30 meters of open water to a position with better angle and cover. As he dove behind a fallen log, another sniper bullet struck the water exactly where he had been standing a second earlier. From his new position, Jenkins had a clear view of the elevated platform. He could see the sniper's rifle barrel protruding through the camouflage, and more importantly, he could see a small portion of the shooter's body positioned behind the weapon. Jenkins was an excellent marksman, but this was an extremely difficult shot. He was shooting upward at an angle through thick vegetation, at a partially concealed target while under stress from enemy fire. Everything in his training told him to take his time and make the shot count. He controlled his breathing, steadied his rifle against the fallen log, and began squeezing the trigger slowly and steadily. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, and Jenkins watched through his scope as the bullet found its mark. The elevated sniper's rifle clattered down through the branches, followed by the sound of a body hitting the platform. For the first time in over an hour, the deadly accurate fire from above ceased. But their celebration was short-lived. Rodriguez, still positioned high in the mangrove tree, could see the approaching enemy reinforcements more clearly now. They were moving fast and would reach Davis's position within minutes. "Sarge, we need to move now," Rodriguez called down. "Those reinforcements will have us surrounded in less than 5 minutes." Thompson knew Rodriguez was right, but they still had to deal with the other snipers who had been shooting at them from different positions. Taking out the elevated shooter was a victory, but the battle was far from over. The death of the elevated sniper had shifted the tactical situation, but not in their favor. The remaining enemy shooters, realizing their master sniper was down, began firing more aggressively. Thompson could hear at least 2 different rifles engaging his scattered squad members from concealed positions. Rodriguez scrambled down from his tree observation post with urgent information. "Sarge, those reinforcements are moving fast. I count 8 soldiers and they're carrying what looks like a mortar tube. If they get that set up, we're finished." Thompson's mind raced through their limited options. With Private Williams seriously wounded and losing blood, they couldn't move quickly, but staying in place meant being overrun by superior numbers with heavy weapon support. "Davis, how mobile is Williams?" Thompson called over the radio. "He's conscious but weak, Sarge. I can carry him." But not far and not fast. The approaching enemy reinforcements had been smart in their approach, using the thick vegetation and multiple water channels to get close without being detected, until Rodriguez spotted them from his elevated position. Now they were close enough that Thompson could occasionally hear voices calling to each other in Vietnamese. Jenkins, still positioned with a good view of the area where he had eliminated the elevated sniper, noticed something troubling. The rifle that had fallen from the platform was a high-quality Soviet-made sniper weapon with advanced optics, equipment that suggested these weren't local militia fighters, but professional soldiers. Martinez, despite his wounded arm, was studying the pattern of incoming fire from the remaining snipers. "Sarge, I think there are only 2 more shooters left, but they're coordinating their fire. When one shoots, the other moves to a new position." This observation was crucial tactical intelligence. Coordinated sniper teams were much more dangerous than individual shooters because they could cover each other's movements and multiply their effective firepower. Thompson made a difficult decision. "We're going to have to split up again. Davis, you and Johnson start moving Williams toward the extraction point. Move slowly and carefully. Speed won't help if you walk into an ambush." "What about you, Sarge?" Davis asked. "Rodriguez, Martinez, Jenkins and I are going to try to eliminate those remaining snipers and buy you time to get Williams out of here." It was a desperate plan that asked his wounded and exhausted Marines to do the impossible, but Thompson couldn't see any alternative. The approaching reinforcements with mortar support meant they had perhaps 10 minutes before their position became completely untenable. As Davis began the careful process of preparing Williams for movement, Thompson's assault team prepared to engage the remaining snipers. They had learned valuable lessons from their encounter with the elevated shooter, and now they had a better understanding of their enemy's tactics. The first remaining sniper was positioned somewhere to the southwest, based on the angle of his recent shots. The second was operating from the southeast, creating a crossfire that had been keeping Thompson's men pinned down. Both positions were well concealed and offered excellent fields of fire. Rodriguez, whose climbing skills had proven invaluable, volunteered to get elevated again to spot for the others. This time he chose a different tree, one that would give him a view of both suspected sniper positions. As Rodriguez climbed, the southwest sniper fired again, this time at Davis's group as they began their slow withdrawal with the wounded Williams. The bullet struck a tree trunk just inches from Davis's head, showering him with bark and splinters. "Contact southwest," Rodriguez called from his climbing position. "I can see his muzzle flash. He's in a spider hole about 200 meters out, well camouflaged." A spider hole was a classic Viet Cong fighting position, a carefully concealed underground bunker with a small opening just large enough for a rifle barrel. These positions were extremely difficult to spot and nearly impossible to assault directly. Jenkins began working his way toward the southwest position, using every lesson learned from their encounter with the elevated sniper. This time he moved slowly and carefully, using the water and vegetation to mask his approach. Meanwhile, Martinez took on the dangerous job of drawing fire from the southeast sniper. Despite his wounded arm, he began making small movements designed to attract attention, hoping to get the sniper to reveal his position with a shot. Thompson coordinated the complex tactical dance, watching his men move through the swamp while keeping an eye on the time. The enemy reinforcements were getting closer, and he could now hear them clearly calling to each other as they moved through the vegetation. The southeast sniper took Martinez's bait, firing at what he thought was an exposed target. Martinez had anticipated the shot and was already moving when the bullet struck the water where he had been positioned. More importantly, Rodriguez spotted the muzzle flash from his elevated position. "Southeast sniper is mobile," Rodriguez reported. "He's moving between prepared positions connected by underwater tunnels. I can see at least 3 different shooting positions." This intelligence explained why the snipers had been so effective and difficult to locate. They weren't just hiding in static positions. They had built an interconnected system of fighting positions that allowed them to appear, shoot, and disappear like ghosts. Jenkins had worked his way to within 50 meters of the southwest spider hole when he made a disturbing discovery. The position wasn't occupied by just one sniper. He could see evidence of at least 2 people in the underground bunker. They were facing a coordinated sniper team working from prepared positions with multiple escape routes. The sound of mortar rounds being prepared echoed across the swamp. The enemy reinforcements had arrived and were setting up their heavy weapons. Thompson realized they had perhaps 5 minutes before mortar fire would start raining down on their positions. "All units, we're out of time," Thompson announced over the radio. "We take these shots now or we don't go home." The first mortar round whistled overhead and exploded in the water 50 meters behind Davis's withdrawing group. The enemy had their range and were adjusting their fire. Thompson knew the next rounds would be much closer to their targets. Jenkins was in position near the southwest spider hole, but he faced an almost impossible tactical situation. Two snipers in an underground bunker with multiple escape routes couldn't be eliminated with small arms fire from a single Marine. He needed a different approach. "Rodriguez, can you see any weakness in that position from up there?" Jenkins called softly over the radio. Rodriguez studied the camouflaged bunker through his binoculars. Years of construction work before joining the Marines had taught him to analyze structures for weak points. "Jenkins, there's a ventilation shaft about 10 meters behind the main position. If you can get a grenade down that shaft, you might be able to force them out." It was a long shot, literally and figuratively, but Jenkins began working his way toward the ventilation shaft. The approach would take him even closer to the sniper position, but it was their best chance of eliminating the threat. Meanwhile, Martinez was engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Southeast sniper team. Every time he moved, accurate rifle fire forced him back into cover. His wounded arm was making it difficult to return effective fire, but he kept trying to draw attention away from Jenkins's flanking movement. The second mortar round landed much closer, sending up a geyser of muddy water just 20 meters from Thompson's position. The enemy mortar crew was walking their fire toward the Marines' positions, and it wouldn't be long before they found the range. Davis's group was making slow progress through the swamp with the wounded Williams. The young Marine was conscious but weak from blood loss, and carrying him through the difficult terrain was exhausting work. Davis knew they wouldn't reach safety before the enemy reinforcements caught up with them. Thompson made another difficult command decision. "Martinez, Rodriguez, fall back toward Davis's position. Help them get Williams out of here. Jenkins and I will handle the snipers. Sarge, you can't take on 2 sniper teams with just—" Rodriguez started to protest. "That's an order, Marine." Thompson cut him off. "Get Williams to safety. That's your mission now." Rodriguez reluctantly began climbing down from his observation post while Martinez started his withdrawal toward Davis's group. Both Marines knew they were leaving their sergeant and Jenkins in an almost hopeless tactical situation, but military discipline demanded they follow orders. Jenkins had reached the ventilation shaft and was preparing to drop a fragmentation grenade down the narrow opening. It was a difficult throw that required precision timing and a lot of luck. If the grenade bounced out or didn't detonate properly, he would have revealed his position for nothing. The third mortar round landed close enough to shower Thompson with mud and debris. The enemy had found their range and would probably score direct hits with the next salvo. Time had run out for elaborate tactical maneuvers. Jenkins pulled the pin on his grenade, counted off the timing, and dropped it down the ventilation shaft. 4 seconds later, the muffled explosion echoed from underground, followed by shouts in Vietnamese and the sound of men scrambling through tunnels. 2 enemy soldiers emerged from concealed exits near the spider hole, coughing and disoriented from the underground explosion. Jenkins engaged them immediately with rapid rifle fire, hitting both men before they could orient themselves and return fire. But the victory was short-lived. From his elevated position, Rodriguez could see more enemy movement as the main body of reinforcements began to surround the remaining Marines. "Sarge, they're everywhere. We're completely surrounded." Thompson assessed their situation with the cold calculation of an experienced combat leader. They had eliminated 3 sniper positions, but were now facing overwhelming numbers with limited ammunition and no way to call for support. The radio was still mostly static due to atmospheric conditions. The Southeast sniper team, apparently realizing their comrades had been eliminated, began firing more aggressively. Bullets snapped overhead as Thompson tried to work his way toward Jenkins's position. The enemy knew they had the Americans, trapped and were closing in for the kill. Davis's group had made it, perhaps 200 meters toward the extraction point when they encountered the first of the encircling enemy forces. Private Johnson spotted armed figures moving through the vegetation ahead and signaled for the group to halt. "We can't go forward, Sarge," Davis reported over the radio. "Enemy blocking our withdrawal route." Thompson realized they were completely trapped. Enemy forces ahead, behind, and on both flanks, with mortar fire beginning to bracket their positions. It was the kind of tactical nightmare that haunted every infantry commander's dreams. But Thompson had survived 8 months in Vietnam by refusing to give up, even in impossible situations. He began formulating one last desperate plan that might give his Marines a chance to survive. The 4th mortar round landed close enough to knock Thompson flat. The explosion left Thompson's ears ringing and his vision blurred, but he forced himself to stay conscious. Mud and swamp water covered his face as he rolled into the shallow depression created by the mortar blast. The enemy was closing in from all directions, and his scattered squad was running out of options. Jenkins had successfully eliminated the Southwest sniper team, but now found himself cut off from the rest of the squad. Enemy soldiers were moving through the vegetation between his position and Thompson's location. He could hear Vietnamese voices getting closer as search teams began systematically checking every possible hiding spot. Rodriguez and Martinez had reached Davis's group, but their situation was equally desperate. Williams was barely conscious from blood loss, and they were trapped between the swamp behind them and enemy forces blocking their forward movement. The extraction point might as well have been on the moon. Thompson's radio suddenly crackled to life with an unexpected transmission. Whiskey 4, this is Falcon 3-7. We have your position and are inbound for close air support. Mark your location with smoke and take cover. Through the static and interference, Thompson heard the most beautiful sound in the world. The distant roar of approaching jet engines. An Air Force F-4 Phantom had somehow penetrated the weather and located their position. Help was finally coming. All units, air support inbound, Thompson transmitted. Johnson, pop smoke to mark our position. Everyone else, get as low as possible and stay put. Johnson pulled a yellow smoke grenade from his pack and threw it into the open water near their position. The bright yellow smoke began billowing up through the humid air, creating a clear target marker for the approaching aircraft. The enemy forces had heard the jets too and knew what was coming. Thompson could hear shouted orders in Vietnamese as the surrounding troops began taking cover or attempting to withdraw from the target area. The systematic closing of their traps suddenly became a chaotic scramble for survival. Jenkins used the confusion to begin moving back toward his squad's position. Enemy soldiers who had been methodically searching for him were now more concerned with finding cover from the impending airstrike. He low-crawled through the swamp vegetation, making steady progress toward the smoke marker. The F-4 Phantom screamed overhead at treetop level, the pilot identifying targets and planning his attack run. Thompson could see the aircraft's weapons pylons loaded with napalm canisters and high-explosive bombs. In seconds, the entire area would become an inferno. Heads down, heads down. Thompson shouted over the radio as the Phantom banked around for its attack run. The napalm struck the enemy positions with devastating effect. Walls of orange flame erupted from the jungle as the jellied gasoline burned through vegetation and enemy fighting positions. The carefully prepared spider holes and tunnel systems that had given the snipers such an advantage became death. Traps as fire and smoke filled the underground spaces. Enemy soldiers who had been closing in on the Marines' position were suddenly running for their lives, fleeing the advancing flames. The tactical situation had reversed completely in a matter of seconds. Thompson's radio came alive with the pilot's voice. Whiskey 4, this is Falcon 3-7. I have multiple secondary explosions in the target area. Looks like you found an ammunition dump. Are you clear for extraction? Affirmative, Falcon 3-7. Standing by for extraction. The pilot's mention of secondary explosions explained why the enemy had been so determined to hold this area of swamp. They had been protecting a major supply cache, possibly a staging area for operations further south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Jenkins reached Thompson's position just as the second wave of airstrikes began. High explosive bombs targeted the enemy mortar position and remaining sniper nests, eliminating the threats that had pinned down the Marines for hours. Davis's group began moving again, carrying the wounded Williams toward the extraction point. The enemy forces that had been blocking their path were either dead, wounded, or fleeing from the napalm fires. For the first time since the ambush began, they had a clear route to safety. Rodriguez climbed another tree to observe the results of the airstrike. Most of the enemy positions had been destroyed, and the few surviving soldiers were withdrawing deeper into the swamp. The immediate threat was over, but smoke and flames made the area dangerous for other reasons. Extraction helicopters inbound. ETA 10 minutes, Johnson reported, having finally established clear radio communications. Landing zone is 500 meters south of the smoke marker. Thompson began organizing his squad for the movement to the landing zone. Williams needed immediate medical attention, and all of them were exhausted from hours of combat in the hostile environment. But they were alive, and they were going home. As they moved through the burning swamp toward the extraction point, Thompson reflected on the engagement. They had walked into a carefully planned ambush by skilled enemy soldiers using prepared positions and coordinated tactics. Only their training, courage, and a lot of luck had kept them alive long enough for air support to arrive. The helicopter landing zone was a small island of solid ground surrounded by burning vegetation. 2 Marine Corps CH-46 helicopters touched down simultaneously, their crews ready to provide medical support and extract the squad from the hostile area. Williams was loaded onto the first helicopter along with Martinez, whose wounded arm needed proper medical attention. The rest of the squad boarded the second aircraft, finally safe after one of the longest days of their lives. As the helicopters lifted off from the burning swamp, Thompson looked down at the destruction below. Smoke columns rose from multiple points where the enemy positions had been destroyed. Intelligence officers would later determine that the Marines had stumbled into and helped destroy a major enemy supply depot. The shadow that had lifted from the swamp waters was more than just the physical threat of enemy snipers. It was the shadow of death that had hung over Thompson's squad for hours, finally banished by courage, teamwork, and the arrival of close air support when all seemed lost. Private Williams would recover from his wounds and return to duty. Martinez earned a Purple Heart for his actions while wounded. Jenkins received a Bronze Star for eliminating the elevated sniper position. But for all of them, the memory of that day in the Mekong Delta would remain vivid for the rest of their lives, a reminder of how quickly a routine patrol could become a fight for survival.